Hello, and welcome to the first B.T.F.O of 2025. And for this special occasion, we're going to be talking about Nosferatu, Shadow of the Vampire, and Nosferatu. I I thought it would be fun because before watching 2024's Nosferatu, which I was quite excited for, I watched all of the other Nosferatus as well as I read the Dracula book, um, or at least I listened to the audiobook of it. So, uh, um, but I thought it would be fun to kind of compare and contrast these four movies with a little bit of the book thrown in here and there. And so I guess we'll just go ahead and start with the 1922 silent film of Nosferatu. This one I actually like quite a bit. I'm not super into silent movies. I suppose I just haven't seen that many of them. But I was really surprised because I watched it after watching the Universal Dracula, which the silent film is considerably longer than Universal's Dracula, but it does not feel that way. And I think the fact that it's scored really helps. And I will say that the version I watched, it had, so some of the text cards were not quite preserved that well, and so you could tell that it was very much shifted to one side, or the bottom line would be kind of cut off. But I did think it was interesting, at least the version I watched kept all of the names from Dracula, because for those who don't know, Nosferatu, the silent movie, was going to be an adaptation of Dracula the novel, but in Germany that wasn't in the public domain, and so the Stoker estate told them, no, you cannot make Dracula, and so they just basically changed a lot of the names, and changed some elements of it, and then basically hoped to get that past the German courts, and even the German courts were like, no, this is still very clearly an adaptation of Dracula. And then somehow a copy made it over to the United States, where Dracula was public domain, and so Nosferatu began to exist over here. And so it's kind of a cool concept of film preservation, and I think that after seeing the 2024 movie, it took over 100 years, but I think it's a really neat story of how Nosferatu became its own story, as opposed to just an adaptation of Dracula. But the original silent film basically, it is very similar to Dracula, but they change a few things where for some reason Renfield is Jonathan Harker's boss, and so he sends him to Dracula, and then then he goes crazy, which in the book those are two different characters, but I guess for simplicity they tried to combine them into one, and then they kind of, with Count Orlok or Count Dracula, like him at his house was kind of weird, where they do have, and I like, now I'm trying to remember, maybe it was in the 2024 version, but I know most versions keep the line, and I thought it was kind of funny from the silent film, but like the first thing that Dracula or Orlok says when he sees Mina or Ellen is like, wow, what a lovely throat. And it's a funny, like, a little line where it's like, okay, I get why, obviously he's interested in the blood that's in there, but it's a funny little line. And then, like, the only other, because I found it really neat that they played with the frame rate in the 22 movie to make Dracula seem like he was going faster, which was really neat to see. And I was kind of surprised where the special effects there, like, arguably there is more special effects work in the 22 Nosferatu than there is in Universal's original Dracula. And it's at least, like, it's very much better than the original Dracula, at the very least. But I thought it was kind of odd. They have a Van Helsing character in the silent movie, but he really doesn't do anything. Like, he's there for a scene where he gives a lecture on, like, vampiric animals and plants, and that's it. And then, like, so Jonathan comes back, and he got handed by one of the locals before going to Dracula. He got handed this book of the vampire, and inside it tells Mina that basically a woman of pure heart has to like stay with the vampire all night until the first cock crows, and then, like, they'll be free of the curse of the vampire. And so she, like, basically stays up, and it's kind of funny because in the silent film, Dracula is like, he lives across the street from Jonathan and Mina. So he just kind of comes over in the night and is just sort of there with her for a second, and then the sun rises, and like, he sees that, and he, like, kind of burns up, which isn't the greatest effect, but I'm glad that they put some effort into it, that they actually, like, tried with it, because it's nice to see that level of effort at the very least. So yeah, it's not anywhere near, like, a perfect story, but I did really like it. And so then we'll move into, I actually watched Shadow of the Vampire next, which is the, I believe, 2002 movie that stars Willem Dafoe as Max Schreck, or the guy who played Count Orlok in Nosferatu, the silent movie. And it's really charming, because so the plot of this one is that it is all about the making of the silent movie Nosferatu, except in this version, Max Schreck is a real vampire, and so the guy, the filmmaker, played by John Malkovich, he's trying to make the most realistic vampire movie ever made, And so in order to do that, he found a real vampire, and he's like trying to get him to act in his movie. And it's pretty funny, where I especially like they have their cinematographer, or back then their photographer, he goes missing, or no, he like ends up getting sick and dies, and John Malkovich is the only one that knows that was Orlok, and so he goes to Orlok, and he's like, you just killed my photographer. You can't kill any more of my crew. My crew is off limits. Willem Dafoe just goes, what about the writer? We don't need the writer. I can eat the writer. And he's like, no, my crew is off limits. And it's kind of funny. It's a very tongue-in-cheek kind of movie, which I did appreciate. I appreciate that it knew what kind of a movie it was, and it does that rare thing where a lot of the humor comes from how seriously everyone is taking it. I really liked that one. And so at this point I'm like, okay, I'm really liking these Nosferatu movies. They're pretty fun. And then I watched 1978's Nosferatu the Vampire, which is a funny title because Nosferatu is not actually his name, unlike what SpongeBob would have you believe. Nosferatu is just an old, I believe it's an old Romani word for vampire or for undead. But so it's basically Vampire the Vampire. But yeah, so this is a Werner Herzog film, and it is probably the worst adaptation of Dracula or Nosferatu that I've seen. Just to start off, the thing that puts you off immediately is, so in the Dracula novel, there is Mina Harker, who is Jonathan Harker's wife, and there's Lucy Westenra, her friend. In this movie, it's Lucy Harker and Mina Westenra. I was like, what the fuck? Why did you change that? That's just gonna make it confusing for people who know the story. And so, this one's kind of weird because they keep Renfield as Jonathan's boss from Nosferatu, but the Renfield guy in this, and I feel a little bad because, so apparently, this was a French-German collaboration, and they had English dialogue coaches to get all of the actors to speak English, which it seems like such a weird, why wouldn't you just hire English actors at that point? But so there's a little bit of leeway for the actors, because it's well, they're not I don't know how much English they all actually knew, or if they were just reciting lines phonetically. But the actor for Renfield is really fucking annoying, where it feels like they told him that your character's crazy, and so he went, oh, okay, I'm just gonna laugh maniacally between every sentence. So he'd be like, hee hee hee, I'm Renfield, hee hee, I'm crazy, hee hee, Jonathan, go to Transylvania, hee hee. It's God damn it, shut the fuck up, please. It was so annoying. But so he sends Jonathan to Transylvania, and like Jonathan is like, hey, Lucy, my like beautiful wife, why don't you stay with Mina, and like then I'll return later. And so then he goes off, and it's kind of funny where like they mix up a lot of the events from like both the Dracula novel and Nosferatu the movie, where like when he shows up to Dracula's castle, like Dracula's there and he's like telling him to eat, but then he's like immediately hostile to him, and so like Jonathan like ends up cutting his thumb, and Dracula's like, oh, like let me taste your blood, like give it to me, like let me suck your thumb. And it's like, what the fuck, like what, why is he being so violent? Like, because like in the book that happens at one point where Jonathan cuts himself while shaving, and like Dracula just tells him that like, look, you need to be really, really careful about like cutting yourself, and that's also where we learn that Dracula doesn't show up in Reflections, because then he like tells him that like the mirror is what did it to him, and he's like the vanity of people, and then like breaks the mirror on him. But in this, he just sort of like really wants to suck the blood out of his thumb, and so then like Jonathan's like, you know what, man, like I'm not cool with this, okay, like can you just like sign the contract? And he's like, oh, okay, like sure, I'll sign the contract. And then he's like, okay, well now you're not gonna leave ever. Then like he gets his boxes and he puts them on the cart, which I thought was really weird because he does that like all in real time, and it's like, damn, this is something that the 1922 movie got right, where they adjusted the frame rate so that it looks like he's loading them on faster, which is also a thing that it's like, yeah, so that's from Nosferatu, because in the Dracula novel he doesn't think he can actually lift the boxes. Like he has people come in and lift the boxes for him, because it's not until like he's in England that he realizes that he has the strength to lift the boxes, because that's kind of a big thing of the Dracula novel, is that he has like very much little experience with his powers, so he's figuring them out as he goes along. But then like Jonathan makes a rope out of like the sheets, and he climbs out of the tower, and like he's been bitten at this point by Dracula, and then like I think he falls into the river in this version, but somehow he ends up at like the hospital with the nuns. And it's super weird because in the book, that's where Mina, his wife, has to come get him. But in the movie, he just sort of gets up and he's like, no, I gotta go home. So it's like, oh, okay, like, all right, I guess he's just going home. And then I thought it was really funny. They show the quote unquote crash of the Demeter, where you could tell that they like rented an actual boat, and they probably ran it by the guy whose boat it was, that like, hey, we want to crash this, and he was like, fuck no, you're not crashing my boat. So there's like a canal, and it lightly bumps into the side of the canal. They're like, the boat crashed. And then nobody unloads it, until, like, and then just in the middle of the night, Dracula, like, just walks off of the boat, which in the book they, like, very clearly explain that the reason why the police have to get there so fast is to, like, stop people from claiming the cargo, and that Dracula transforms into a dog and runs off of the boat. But in this, he just sort of, in this one, he can't transform. So he just walks off of the boat, and then, like, he just starts killing people, and it gets to the point where they think that there's, like, a plague going on because of just how many people are, like, actually dying. And they have, I'll give them some credit, they've got some, like, more comedic scenes that involve the plague, where, like, basically their society is collapsing because of how many people are dying so quickly. So, like, they're like, oh, well, like, you know, shouldn't the mayor do something about this? And they're like, well, the mayor's dead. Like, okay, well, shouldn't we have, like, go to the city council? And it's like, well, we disbanded that. Like, most of them died. Like, so it's like, yeah, nobody really knows what to do because of how many people are dying. And then, like, it's super weird because then Lucy Harker is just like, or no, because then Jonathan shows back up and he's like, oh, I don't know this woman. Like, I don't know Lucy. So they, like, Mina and Lucy, like, kind of take him in, and they're like, okay, well, I guess we're just gonna have to, like, nurse him back to health here. And then, like, then Lucy's in the bathroom, and Dracula shows up, and he's like, hey, I'm Count Dracula. And she says, I know you from Jonathan's journal. Like, you're evil. And he goes, yeah, well, Jonathan's dying. And then she says, well, everyone dies at some point. And it's one of those answers where it's like, okay, yeah, bitch, like, not what we were talking about at all. Like, what the fuck? Why would you say that? Like, no, that's clearly, like, I mean, he's dying now. Like, but then Dracula's like, oh, well, like, you know, sometimes it's, like, worse if you have to live forever. Like, oh, woe is me, I have to live forever. I was like, okay, like, that's a weird thing to introduce into the Dracula story. But then he goes on to be like, oh, you know, like, I'll never get to experience the love that you and Jonathan do. And Lucy's like, well, yeah, like, that's between me and Jonathan. Not even God can get in on that action. It's like, okay. And then he sees the crucifix that she's wearing, that she's been wearing the whole time. And he's like, I don't like that. Just walks away. I was like, oh, okay. Like, sure, man. And then at some point, Mina Weston Rowe and her husband die. And then, like, Van Helsing gets brought in to look at Jonathan. And Lucy's like, hey, I know what's going on here. This is the work of a vampire, because, like, Jonathan had the Book of the Vampire on him. And they have Van Helsing, out of all the characters that you could have taken from the Dracula novel, they have Van Helsing tell her, well, actually, vampires aren't scientifically proven, so we need to, like, find a cure for Jonathan that is scientifically proven. Like, we need to find out what scientifically proven disease he has. And it's like, fuck you, that's not, like... Van Helsing is the superstitious character. Like, that's his job in the story, is to, like open people up to thinking about superstition, rather than just strict science. So like that's a really bad decision to have Van Helsing be the character that's like, nah, science rules. And so then Lucy's like, okay, well, I know what I have to do. And so she decides that she's going to go destroy the Earth boxes. And so she finds one and puts some wafer in it. And then they're like, yep, that's it. Yep, the Earth boxes are gone. It's like, oh, okay. Like, I feel like he had more than just the one, but okay, I guess you're just telling us that they're all gone now. And so then she goes, like, home, and she's like, well, now I have to stay up all night with him. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, I guess we're taking that from, like, Nosferatu. And so then Dracula shows up, and he, like, it's kind of weird because they make it, like, really sexual. Where he's rubbing his hands up and down her legs and like up her skirt, and then like he goes to like suck out the blood from her neck and then like just starts groping her. It's like, okay. And then the sun comes out, which I was like, again, really, why is this worse than the 22 movie? Because they didn't even bother to get a shot of the sunrise. They just cut to a shot of daylight outside. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess they didn't notice forever that it was daylight. And then, like, Dracula notices that it's daylight and then walks over to the window just to check that it is daylight. And is like, the sun. And so he falls over, dead. And so then, then Van Helsing walks in downstairs, and he finds that Jonathan is sitting in the corner, and he's got a wafer circle that's been made around him so that he can't leave. And so then Van Helsing goes upstairs, and he's like, if only I listened to Lucy and believed her about the vampire. Which it's like, again, fuck you. Van Helsing would have believed her. And so then he goes and grabs like a wooden stake and a hammer, and he's like, well, might as well make sure he's dead. And so then he comes downstairs with this like bloody stake, and there's two like city officials of some sort downstairs, and Jonathan goes, see, I told you, he just murdered the Count. And they're like, well, is that true? And Van Helsing is like, yeah, I guess it is. And so then it's kind of funny where they have one city official tell the other one that, like, hey, why don't you go arrest him? And the other one's like, well, I don't have arms. Like, I'm not armed. I can't really arrest him. And he's like, well, just do it. Like, who cares? Like, just fucking, like, take him away. And so they do that. And then Jonathan gets the maid to clean up the wafer circle so that he can be freed. And then Jonathan turns into Dracula and in broad daylight gets on his horse and like rides off into the sunset. I was like, what the fuck? So sunlight doesn't do anything to him then? Like, what is this? Like, and I was really surprised to go look at like IMDb, where it is almost all positive reviews for this version. And I genuinely wonder if any of those people have actually sat through and watched this whole thing, because it is a fucking mess. And like, I don't know how the fuck anyone, because it feels like it feels a bit like how Annihilation got made, where Alex Garland was like, well, I wrote it based on my memory of the book. And it's like, okay, did you not want to like reread the book? Like, you You didn't think that would be a good idea? No, I like my memory, so we're gonna go based on that. And so it feels like this one was written on a very poor memory of Dracula the book and Nosferatu the 22 movie. And it's like, wow, yeah, this is shit. Like, I don't know how the fuck they made it like this. So yeah, I would not recommend Nosferatu the Vampire from 1979. However, I would recommend Nosferatu from 2024. And the weird thing is that, so Nosferatu 24 incorporates elements from pretty much all of the other Nosferatu films, which I was expecting. That's kind of why I wanted to watch them. But it feels like the one out of the Nosferatu adaptations that comes very much the closest to like defining itself as, no, this is a different story than Dracula. Like, this is its own. Like, I believe that Nosferatu 2024 would actually fly through like a copyright court, as no, they are similar stories, but it's clearly a different like animal of its own. And I like it quite a bit. I think there's a lot of really neat, like, of course, cinematography and acting. Like, holy shit. Yeah, Robert Eggers has some really good actors that are willing to work with them. And like, it's really nice to see such a stacked cast, and it's nice to see that, well, yeah, the cast is stacked. I mean, Lily Rose Depp, Nicholas Hoult, Bill Skarsgård, even Willem Dafoe, like, they are all really pushed in their acting abilities. That it's not just, oh, I've got big names so people will see my movie. Like, I don't really need to like tell them to do anything. It's, no, they are fucking pushed to their max. It is great. And like, I like how, because a lot of the changes that are made in the new one are very much for the better, very much trying to make it a more cohesive story. And so, like, I like that they tie Orlok to Ellen. They tie them together by being like, yeah, he's a weird fucking demon that like answered her prayer and has like basically been like trying to hunt her down ever since. And I like that I forget the character's name in this one, but the Renfield equivalent, I like that he is where the Book of the Vampire comes from, because he's so obsessed with Orlok, like wants to be his servant and stuff. It makes a shit ton of sense that he's the one with the Book of the Vampire, and that like that's where they get it from, rather than just having a random Transylvanian give it to him, or Carpathian give it to Jonathan. And like I like that. So in the Dracula novel, Van Helsing, he has his own practice in Amsterdam, and so he has to keep like leaving every other day pretty much to go check on his practice and like to make arrangements so that he can keep coming back. And I like that they solved that problem in this by saying that, like, well, all of his superstitions kind of got him thrown out of the university, and that he was so superstitious that he had like a feeling that something would happen here. And like the film plays on the idea of like providence and destiny. That like those are very much things in the world of Nosferatu 2024. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's a really cool way to solve that problem. And they have I forget his name. I'm gonna forget a bunch of their names in the Nosferatu 2024 movie, but they're all referenced them by their Dracula equivalent, so the Dr. Stewart equivalent. It's a really good idea to have him there because he serves the same role that he does in the book, where he's very much the more scientifically minded person, but he's also the advocate of Van Helsing. And so he has to tell people, like, hey, come on, like, just give him a shot, like, listen to what he's saying. And then they've got Aaron Taylor Johnson playing the Arthur equivalent, and he's a really nice character to have in there because he's the layman that, like, basically he gets to appeal to, like, look, I'm not really sure about all this, like, mysticism, but I also don't know enough about, like, the science side to really, like, come to a conclusion between you two. It would say that, like, I think one of the weaker points of the movie is Anna, the Lucy equivalent, because she really doesn't, like, have a role in this version, which is kind of a shame because Lucy in the book very much serves as, like, the first example of what happens when you're bitten by a vampire, like, how do you become a vampire, and how do we get rid of a vampire, and, like, very much she serves to prove, or she exists so that Van Helsing can prove to the rest of the crew that, no, look, like, I'm fucking serious, like, there are vampires, she's one of them. And, like, she doesn't really serve that role in this. Like, she gets bit, and Van Helsing's like, oh shit, she's been bit by a vampire. Then they're like, no, like, you're crazy, like, that's a rat. Then, like, she ends up dying, and so do the two kids. And then I did think it was kind of weird that, like, because I'm all right with some of the, like, sexual stuff that they do in this, especially given the fact that in this version Nosferatu is, like, a sexual demon, and so I think a lot of the stuff that they do with Ellen and, like, Thomas, like, I think that stuff makes sense. I don't really get why they had Aaron Taylor Johnson be like, my dead wife, I'm gonna fuck her now, and then, like, somehow he dies. That's just a little, like, I really wonder if there's a, like, deleted scene that explains that, like, oh, she bit him, or, like, because, I mean, they do show that, like, he's sick, and maybe it's trying to imply that, like, Orlok bit him at some point, because we do see that Orlok has control over him at one point, but it does feel a little weak that it, like, Willem Dafoe and the crew, they just show up and he's dead. Like, I guess he just died mid-fuck. So they're like, well, okay, I guess we better, like, burn him. And it's like, well, okay. Which, that's another thing that I do wonder. Like, I'm not opposed to it, but I do kind of wonder where the, like, holy fire came from, because that's not something that I've seen in any of the other adaptations. Like, which they do have like driving a stake through the heart in this version. So I kind of wonder why they wouldn't have just done that. Instead, they're like, no, we have to like burn them with our holy torches. But I do like that this version accounts for Thomas not being there, like the night that Ellen has to like kill Orlok or has to sacrifice herself for Orlok. I like that they account for that by having the Van Helsing equivalent like tell him that like, well, look, we've got to destroy his Earth box, which in this version they only give him one so that they don't have to account for running around and like destroying the other Earth boxes, which I do think is one of the like weaker parts of the Dracula book, where in the book Dracula has 50 Earth boxes and they find like 99% of them in just 2 different locations, and like so then they just destroy all of them all at once, and it's like, oh, okay, like guess that's over. And then Dracula manages to get like one on another boat, then I think there's another one on another boat, but like it's something that is made a lot simpler in this version of Nosferatu, which I liked. I was appreciative of, and I like the fact that in this version Ellen has to sacrifice herself to save everyone else, because as much as I get the whole like happy ending that at least the 22 movie has, which also exists in the book, because in the book Dracula does bite Mina, and that's a big part of the reason why they want to kill Dracula, because when they kill Dracula then her curse is lifted, and so that gives them like a happy ending. But I do think that if you're going to keep the whole Nosferatu, you have to like stay awake with the vampire until like sunlight. I do think that at that point it's like, yeah, you probably should make it be that it has to be a sacrifice, and so I think that works out really well. And yeah, I guess I would really recommend the 2024 version. I feel like it is almost entirely like upgrades as far as an adaptation goes, and yeah, I guess that's my brief thoughts on 4 different movies and a little bit of a book review. So yeah, this was a bit of a longer one, but if you've stuck around, thank you. And well, yeah, like the video, subscribe, and bye-bye.